So again, why can't we get along? Can't we just get along? And so go, you shall not bear false witness is the 8th commandment. And sometimes it's easiest to kind of know the significance and the importance of these when you're on the other side. It's like Adam shared last week about stealing when he had his $60 stolen from him while playing racquetball. That really hits home. And so when it comes to this commandment, I had a couple of experiences that came to mind. One kind of childish and the other more significant. But in, I think, 5th or 6th grade, we're playing flag football after school. And I grew up in Brainerd, so there was several elementary schools we'd play each other. And so, of course, one of the rules of flag football is you can't tackle. You grab that flag of the runner, and they're down. It was a soggy, wet day, and so we're out there, and I guess I was playing defense. And I'm running after the ball carrier, and all of a sudden from behind me I get pushed real hard, and I pushed right into the ball runner and knock him down. Just looked like a tackle, So I flagged for tackling, and I just bawled. I just cried and cried and cried because I was falsely accused. I didn't tackle him. I was pushed. And I was kept crying, and they're saying, is something wrong? Are you hurt? And I just was, for the next couple of plays, I was crying. So that sense of wrongly accused has really hurt me. Such a rule keeper I was, so that was traumatic, I guess, in that sense. The next one I think of was, that's about 10 years ago, when I resigned from my one pastor position in this town, and eventually we started Christ Lutheran. I had a couple people over a course of, a few weeks come to me and say, do you know what people are saying? And I'm not going to repeat the exact thing they were saying. I don't want to further that details, but there was a whopper of his financial wrong that I was a part of, that I had caused. Or, that I had taken advantage of or something, and so what I discovered, though, is that, my standing in the community, I guess, maintained itself. My reputation survived because those people, I think, that told me, a couple of people, and others, must have defended me. So that, I was able to carry on, and be pastor and other things like that in the community. So they shielded me from that false accusation. I mean, there may be still people that probably still believe that thing, that claim, the allegation. But they were doing exactly what Martin Luther teaches us to do in this situation. So I want to put up his explanation again for you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does this mean? He teaches us we are to fear and love God so that we do not betray, slander, or lie about our neighbor, but defend them, speak well of them, and explain their actions in the kindest way. Now I kind of say, if you want to memorize one thing of the Luther's explanations of the commandments, this is the one to memorize, especially that last part, the positive part. Defend them, speak well of them, and explain their actions in the kindest way. Boy, would things be different if we as a culture could just do that, and in our personal relationships. Because we do just the opposite. And that's, of course, the point of having commandments, is because our human nature, the tendency is to do just the opposite, and to pass on lies and lie and fudge and so forth. And so, again, we need to see the restraint that our human nature needs, and that's why God lovingly gives us these commandments, so we can get along better. And even especially with our opponents. Now that's what these commandments are really getting at as well, not murder and steal, we tend to do that easily to opponents. Well, no, we need to they are our neighbors too. And we need to be restrained from that. And again, we've been seeing how Jesus, to get at that, to help us restrain ourselves, he gets to the emotions behind the commandments. When he teaches us, like murder, watch out for anger. That's when it begins. You've already broken the commandment. With adultery, it's lust. That's where the breaking of the commandment begins. Restrain that. With stealing, you might say it's greed that moves us to steal. And then when we come to lying, certainly one can lie just to hurt other people, so forth, or slander them. But I think also it's often about reputation, and that's what's damaged when you're lied about or false allegations. And sometimes we want to do that to other people. We want to bear false witness to knock them down, knock down their reputation, put somebody down a notch, and then we feel above them. So that's where we need to be watching ourselves. And a reputation is a very precious thing. That is it. Luther says we treasure reputation because if your reputation is damaged and maintains its fall there, you just cannot operate in the same ways in society and even in your family. We know how false accusations can end careers. Even though if they're proved to be false, that hangs over people forever in some cases. It just doesn't allow them the same respect. And so it's very critical to be watching ourselves with this. And that is, again, why some people do slander and lie. They want to, again, they want to end somebody's career. They don't want people to trust them. And so this is how we get along better, and why it's important, because we need to trust each other. In society, we have so much that we rely upon, just basic trust in relationships, individually and with organizations. If we don't trust them and their reputation, we can't operate very well. And again, just as well as not just for friends and family, but for opponents, even enemies, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's kind of the way we explain their actions in the kindest way. We kind of say, give them the benefit of the doubt. You may not know the whole story. Let's wait and let's explain it kindly and if we know more. We sometimes see an opponent or an enemy especially, and we see something suspicious happen, and we jump on it. And we like to call them out, maybe publicly or on the grapevine, online, Facebook, whatever. And, we like to put them down a notch. You just can't believe it could be otherwise. It has to be bad or wrong. And it's kind of like when they throw a penalty against your home team. Oh no, come on, it can't be right. And that is our human nature. We assume we're right and how we're seeing things. We assume it's the correct way, but that can blind us from the actual truth of a situation. This tendency to think we're right, to be open to say, could I actually be wrong? That's hard for us to do. And it is something that is very much in our human nature. We sometimes talk too much about the freedom of our thinking and our wills, that we're very, we're free, but I guess psychology and human nature teaches us otherwise. And this is something that Martin Luther is a good contribution to our thinking, called the bondage of the will. We speak of this, his contribution, or the Reformation's contribution, justified by faith, the graciousness of God, we call it the theological principle of the Reformation. He also had the anthropological principle of the Reformation. Theological is about God. What's principles about God? He had This is the principle about human beings that was important. The bondage is the will. Wills have a motivation. They are always moving in one way. We're not as rational about our decisions. And you can see how this has to be the case. We aren't always thinking about exactly every step of the way. We have habits and motivations that, allow us to slide through life and to be thinking about everything wouldn't work. But that also can get us going in a direction that isn't right. Intuitions rule us too much sometimes, and we trust our feelings that are very often not accurate. And psychologists have confirmed this sense of the bondage of the will, that our wills are willing all the time in a certain way. They call it motivated reasoning. So just bear with me a bit as we talk a bit about psychology. I think it's very helpful, as I've been reading Jonathan Haidt about this. And he quotes in a book called The Righteous Mind, he quotes a social psychologist explaining why we believe in questionable medicine or conspiracy theories. And social psychologist Tom Gilovich studies the cognitive mechanisms of beliefs, and his simple formulation helpful is that when we want to believe something, we ask ourselves, can I believe it? Can I believe it? And then we search for supporting evidence, and if we find even a single piece of evidence that may even be false, we can stop thinking. Now we have permission to believe. We have justification in case anyone asks. And in contrast, when we don't want to believe something, we ask ourselves, must I believe it? Must I believe it? And then we search for contrary evidence, and if we find a single reason to doubt the claim, we can dismiss it. And so, just Google it. If it's on the internet, it must be true. And they even say that, or even study how your brain works. When you have a certain belief, and we get a rush, actually, when our views get reinforced. Some dopamine is sent out when our convictions are confirmed. So really, stubbornness is addictive. The more that view is reinforced, your view, you get that high. So it's very hard to be open-minded and to look at the other side in a situation. That's kind of the bondage of the will. That would be how Luther puts it. And now in scientists, they have, they have conviction. There's researchers in science. They know that they can't just go by their own convictions as an individual. There's the process we talked about before of peer review. They must submit their work, their findings, to review. And that requires humility. Come point out the mistakes you see in my work where I have missed it. But they've known that is the only way that we can get to the truth or more accuracy on things of scientific inquiry is if we work together. Individually, we're not very good at finding the whole truth. And so that requires humility. And Jesus teaches about this kind of in a little different way, but it's the same process going on here. It's in Matthew 18, starting at 15 and on. This is a passage that is referred to. This is how we do church discipline, the process for dealing with the wrong. So let me just read that, Matthew 18:15. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. So this is kind of on the negative, but if you see somebody doing something wrong, or in this case it was to themselves, you could be tempted to say, hey, look what they're doing to me. But Jesus says, no, go individually, privately to the person and say, I was wronged. You wronged me. Now, he doesn't talk about it, but part of the process there is as well, maybe you misunderstood. no, that isn't what I did. That isn't what I meant. And you can figure it out together privately before it goes any further. And so their reputation may be maintained. As well, if they actually have done wrong, and you deal with them in private, you in a sense are helping them to maintain their reputation. You can reconcile, and it doesn't need to go further than that, and you've, as he says, you've regained that one. You restored the reputation. It's like my wife, Kristen, at teaching, she tries to often, when she needs to discipline a student, take them out of the room and talk to them instead of disciplining them in front of everybody or talking to them. Again, that is easier for them to take the correction. Then Jesus goes on, but if you're not listened to when he went one-to-one, take one or two others along with you so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So again, this is, again, it says you're trying to convince the person they did wrong. But again, those other people can also help you. What if you're getting it wrong about what the wrong was? And it really is, you are enlightened as well. More people involved helps you come to the truth better. And then lastly, he says, if that member refuses to listen to them, again, you and the others, tell it to the church, and if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let that one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So it gets, there are times when you need to make it public, but you've taken the time before then to make sure you got it right. So the charge or allegation is correct, and you're again trying to win them back. So before, he starts spreading it, Jesus says, go one-on-one. And so this, for us, we need to be very careful before we put something out on Facebook or wherever and or repost something. Again, in the old days, it was just, you could send it out on the grapevine, the gossip vine, person to person, but now we have so many ways that allegations and falsehoods can be spread so quickly and so easily, and then they multiply so quickly, Facebook. So, let us be very careful about the information we're passing on. I don't do it very often, but once in a while I, will privately message somebody, are you really sure about that? The terminology, we want to be accurate, don't we? And so forth. So I guess we need to be doing that for each other. I encourage us to do that, to check each other out that way. Try and do it privately so we can keep the false allegations to a minimum. But it also has, it's not just individual reputations, but the grapevine of, Facebook and other places is so, effective or damaging to kind of general messages about society. False beliefs big false beliefs can be passed so easily and, take on a life of their own that we need to watch that as well. There is the bearing false witness in our relationships that is important to curtail, but also as a society. This is why we can't get along, because we don't trust each other. Trust is damaged when there are these big messages that are falsely spread. I'll just point out a couple. One is just a sense of, danger in the world, in our society. Can we trust the neighbor? Can we trust strangers? Things like that. And it's kind of like, and you hear, of course, politicians, we need the law and order, and we need crack down more and more and more. And is that really the case? And if you look at the statistics, and Fortress of Mirror was a book I read a while back just talking about this. Since the 90s, 25 some years ago, the crime rate of violent crime has dropped significantly by half. So law enforcement, other organizations, even things like getting lead out of the water in places has probably led to less criminality. For example, the statistic in 1993 in America, incidents of violent crime 750 per 100,000. In 2019, it's down to 366 per 100,000. So half the incidents of violent crime. Now, last year, 2020, certainly a jump up, but you can explain that with the pandemic and economic hardship and too much time on people's hands. And even then, though, it's much less than the kind of the crime wave of the 90s. And unfortunately, I think many people operate though as if it's worse than it was in the 90s. And one little example is just, when do you let your children go walk to school? How young? I mean, we let our kids in the 90s, walk several blocks, go down to the park. They're young grade schoolers, kindergartners, no problem. If you do that now, you might be arrested for child neglect in some places, because that seems to be, you're not protecting your children. And you talk about the average age when the parents let their kids go by themselves, it's into the middle school years now. So people are operating and not trusting each other when they really should be able to trust each other. Now, certainly there are certain cities and places where, yes, it's not safe. But in general, we are a safer society. And so and I think this also puts a bind on law enforcement themselves. And it can certainly, affect their thinking. They see suspicious activity. How do they interpret that? Will they interpret that, explain it in the kindest way? That's so hard. If the sense is that it's a dangerous time, and you got to hand it to the law enforcement, the bind they're in. They're charged with holding to that best explanation as long as they can until, weapons are drawn or something. So that's very difficult to do. But it is sad that we feel that we live in such a dangerous time that can sometimes precipitate that too soon. So let us encourage each other with how well, in a sense, law enforcement has done and other factors and organizations in improving our safety. A second example would just be elections, a recent election. We had the best turnout in a recent presidential election in 60 years, or some say 100 years, 65% of the electorate. And then you ask why, and then you hear claims of fraud. Is that the kindest way to explain that? I think even the most logical way to explain that. I would say it was the most motivated voters on each side in my lifetime. Most intensity about motivation. That's why there was a big turnout, because people were really into the election. And then there's that, must I believe that though? And we search for reasons not to believe that. And so we've had all these claims, these allegations about fraud. And that just points to a kind of a troubling similarity between this election and the previous presidential election in 2016 that you may be aware of. But so back in 2016, or actually there's a poll a year or so after that, a little more than a year. And this was the result from YouGov. 2 out of 3 Democrats claim Russia tampered with vote tallies on election day to help the president, something for which there's no credible evidence. It's not just that there was Russians on Facebook, with influencing voters, but that they actually tampered with the tallies on election day. That was the claim that 2 out of 3 Democrats believed, more than a year after the election. And then, of course, this election, the similarity with this election, just last Sunday I saw a poll asking, was Joe Biden legitimately elected? 75% of Republicans said no. So about the same Democrats, previous election, Republicans not believing things that, again, the evidence doesn't show that. So why do so many Americans of both parties believe in conspiracy theories, in particular about an election that doesn't go their way? Well, that's an example of motivated reasoning. It's hard to be open-minded when things don't go our way. And so I've been reminding people, all elections are local. Ballots are processed and counted not by some bureaucrats down at the state capitol, but by your neighbors, members of your own community. And if you explored who these poll workers actually were, you probably know many of them, you'd probably discover that they were some of the most civic-minded people in your community. And to spread conspiracy theories about elections is a direct attack on their personal integrity and reputation. And really passing on any conspiracy theory is really a form of gossip, which is never harmless. So I'm here to kind of defend my neighbor, the election poll workers, and to ask in general, what is the state of our elections, how they're operated today, kind of looking at the crime situation. Like crime, that's gone down significantly. Our elections are really more accurate and secure than ever. And just to think about the history and notice what's happened in the last couple of decades. Because remember, the big turning point was the 2000 election between Gore and Bush, where it came down to some 500 votes in Florida, and they're looking at recounting and hanging chads and holes punched in ballots and things like this that were very challenging, but that caused a lot of reform to take place in our voting systems that we can really take a lot of confidence in. Things like online registration databases within each state. So it used to be just kind of county by county or so forth. So somebody moved from one part of the state to the other, where they had duplicate records and things like that. Most states have a statewide database, so they can eliminate that kind of confusion. And even some of that is now shared between states. There's all sorts of much more accuracy about who's registered. And then even the balloting process. We have paper ballots in most states now, where you fill it out, and then it's there for a recount. Or in some cases, the ballot is displayed on the screen, you make the choice, but then it prints out the paper ballot that's counted. Or again, you can use that to recount. There are only 9 states that don't have paper ballots statewide. Some of them have many, but they're moving that way. So, and none of those states are contested states. And so it's a much more accurate way, and you have a paper trail, so it can be much more accurate. Sure, they do recounts, and there are a few mistakes. Usually numbers go one way or another, but again, it's very can be verified. And then, of course, the mail-in votes, that was kind of a big issue this time, but again, there's all sorts of correspondence between, there's only one ballot mailed out for a registered voter that's tracked. There's signature verification, it's kind of high-tech too. And so there's really, you can't imagine and even think of ways that hundreds of thousands of people could defraud that system. And it's even, what's the attitude? Are we explaining their actions in the kindest way when we think of the electorate? That many thousands of people would let their ballots be taken from their mailbox, or somebody would influence them and come and tell them how to vote. Again, that's a very negative way to think of people. And unless we're given evidence, we shouldn't. We should think that people are following the rules. Certainly some don't. But the poll workers are doing a good job. Yes, there are mistakes, widespread. No. Election allegations, whether they're true or not isn't because I believe it. If I believe it, doesn't make it true or false. We have to go with the evidence, test it, and yield to that. And, in this election, the evidence was tested many times. And what's the kindest way to interpret that? The poll workers did a great job. Our system is better than ever. And so we again, let us not bear false witness on what happened there. And really in the whole political conversation, it's sad to see against this bearing false witness against the other political party, the extreme rhetoric that, when speaking of the others as the enemy. And one thing they note that just shows how polarized it is. He asked people, would you like your son or daughter to marry somebody of the other party? And that's an issue now. We wouldn't be sure about it. 40, 50 years ago, that's not a big issue. It wasn't a cause for concern, but now it is. And so that's sad to see, and something we need to, again, we can cut that down, we can help our sense of unity as a nation, and just allegations in general about big institutions in our society. Some people put forth the four corners of deceit in our society are government, education, science, media. Well, sure, there are mistakes in government, but just look at how much, in general, we rely on government and how well they provide for us, locally, nationally. Education, sure, are there problems in education? Yeah, but we have the best education system in the world. Certainly in the second, in the college and university. Science, there are mistakes in science, but man, we're the miracle of the vaccination so quickly developed. It's a wonderful institution. And then the media. Sure, there's bias in media. And it's difficult when there's so many avenues now. But people need to ask tough questions of people in charge. And they're not the enemy of the people. They help people, keep people accountable. So it's one thing to recognize mistakes, it's another thing to make sweeping allegations. And, when we explain others' actions in the kindness way, we are taking a risk. When we give other people the benefit of the doubt, we are taking a risk. We could be wrong, and they're going to take advantage of us, or they're going to harm somebody else. But that is what we would want, individually, and as a collective. We would want people to give us the benefit of the doubt. And as Christians especially, I think we can take that risk because we are more secure in who we are, in our reputation. Because, first of all, we are children of God. And we know that our worth is secure in that identity, that reputation. And we can, again, weather the allegations or weather the consequences if we give somebody the benefit of the doubt and they take advantage of us. We still are secure. We can take that risk. And so let us be that force of truth-telling and reconciliation and correction within our society, and have the courage to speak for the truth. Because, again, Jesus had that passion to show us that we are his children, and we want to look upon others that same way. Let's pray for that courage. Lord Jesus, help us to be courageous in humility, in seeking the truth and knowing that we may be wrong, and encouraging others to be humble and kind in their words and their explanations of what they see and hear. Help us to be a force for building trust within our society. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.